The morning sun painted Copper Ridge in shades of rust and gold when the first gunshot shattered the silence. Jack Malone hit the dirt hard, his shoulder exploding in fire as the bullet tore through muscle and bone. His horse screamed, a sound no man should ever hear, before six more shots dropped the animal like a felled oak. Blood mixed with Arizona dust beneath Jack's weathered face. At 45, he'd survived the Civil War, the massacre at Wounded Knee, and 10 years of running from his past. Now, sprawled in the red earth with his life seeping away, he wondered if this God-forsaken canyon would finally claim Iron Wolf. The irony wasn't lost on him, a man who'd spent a decade avoiding violence, dying in a gunfight he'd started. But when Jack had seen those black columns of smoke rising from the Apache settlement 5 miles east, he couldn't ride away. Some things mattered more than staying alive. 12 hours earlier, Jack had been driving cattle toward Denver when he spotted the telltale signs of cavalry action, the kind of smoke that meant death and burning homes. A smart man would have kept riding. Jack Malone had never claimed to be smart when conscience was involved. The memory burned hotter than his shoulder wound. Captain Jack Malone, 7th Cavalry, standing before Colonel William Morrison at Pine Ridge. "I will not fire on women and children, sir." Morrison's face had twisted with rage. "That's a direct order, Captain." Jack had thrown his officer's sword at Morrison's feet. "Then court-martial me." He'd saved 30 Apache lives that day by helping them escape through the chaos. Cost him his career, his reputation, his peaceful night's sleep. But when Jack closed his eyes, he didn't see the faces of dead children. That had to count for something in the final accounting. The gunfight at the Apache village had been swift and brutal. 8 cavalry troopers against one man with a Colt, 45 Peacemaker, and 15 years of bitter experience. Jack dropped 5 soldiers before a lucky shot found his shoulder. His horse took the remaining bullets meant for him. The survivors retreated, but their parting words echoed across the canyon. "Colonel Morrison's coming with 50 men. Ain't nowhere to run, Iron Wolf." Now Jack lay dying, watching buzzards circle overhead like nature's own jury. He'd spent 10 years running from his past, only to have it catch up in this desolate stretch of Arizona territory. Some men were born to fight losing battles. Footsteps crunched in the gravel. 3 figures emerged from the canyon shadows, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. Apache women, he realized, studying their buckskin clothing and the way they held their weapons. Jack's hand moved instinctively toward his Colt, then stopped. If they wanted him dead, he'd already be buzzard food. The eldest stepped forward, perhaps 28, with eyes like black obsidian and shoulders that carried the weight of command. Her companions flanked her, one with a medicine bag slung across her chest, the other young and coiled tight as a striking snake. All 3 studied Jack like he was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. "You fought the blue soldiers," the leader said, her English precise and unaccented. Despite her youth, she carried herself with the bearing of royalty. Jack coughed, tasting copper. "Seemed like the neighborly thing to do." The youngest Apache woman spat in the dirt near his boots. "He's cavalry. Look at his uniform, Ayana. 7th Regiment patches." Ayana. Jack knew that name meant eternal blossom in Apache. Seemed fitting for a woman who'd survived what her people called the long death, the systematic destruction of their traditional way of life. The medicine woman knelt beside Jack, examining his wound with professional detachment. Her touch was gentle but efficient, probing the bullet hole with experienced fingers. "Clean through. Broke ribs but missed the lung. He'll live if we treat it properly." "Why should we save a white soldier?" The young one's voice carried 15 generations of justified hatred. "His kind murdered our fathers." Ayana's gaze never left Jack's face. Something flickered in her obsidian eyes, recognition struggling to surface, like a half-remembered dream. "What's your name, soldier?" "Jack Malone, former captain, 7th Cavalry." He paused, then added quietly, Some called me Iron Wolf. The medicine woman's hands froze over his wound. The young one stepped back as if she'd been slapped. But Ayana moved closer, studying Jack's face with sudden intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Show me your chin," she commanded with the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. Jack turned his head, revealing a crescent-shaped scar that ran from his jawline down his neck. Bare claws, earned in Montana 20 years back, during his younger, more reckless days. But Ayana wasn't looking at the scar. She was looking at his eyes. "Kachina," Ayana said softly to the medicine woman. "Do you remember your mother's stories about Pine Ridge?" Kachina's face went pale beneath her bronze skin. "The soldier who refused orders, who helped our people escape the massacre." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mother said he had eyes like winter sky and a scar shaped like the moon." The young woman, Senna, Jack gathered from their earlier exchange, looked between her companions in confusion. "What are you talking about? What soldier?" Ayana knelt beside Jack, her face close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes. The intensity of her stare was almost overwhelming. 10 years ago, a cavalry officer helped my mother and 30 others escape Pine Ridge. My mother described him before she died last winter. Said he threw down his sword rather than kill Apache children. Jack's throat felt like sandpaper. Speaking took effort, but he had to know. "Your mother, what was her name?" "Cocheta. She died 3 winters ago of the lung sickness, but she never forgot the soldier who saved her daughter." Ayana's voice carried the weight of sacred obligation. "You saved my life, Jack Malone, before I was even born." The canyon fell silent except for the wind whistling through the rocks and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Jack understood now why these women hadn't killed him outright. Apache law was absolute when it came to blood debts. But this was more complex than simple vengeance or gratitude. Kachina began unpacking her medicine bag with renewed purpose. "We must treat his wound immediately. Apache law binds us to protect those who protected our people. The debt must be repaid." Senna holstered her knife reluctantly, though suspicion still clouded her features. "The blue soldiers will return in greater numbers. Carrying a wounded man will slow us down, make us easier targets." "Then we make our stand here," Ayana said with the finality of a war chief delivering judgment. "Sacred law doesn't bend for convenience or safety." As Kachina cleaned his wound with burning herbs that made Jack bite back groans, he studied these 3 remarkable women with growing respect. Ayana carried herself like Apache nobility, which she was, daughter of a respected war chief. Kachina moved with the precision of a trained healer, her touch gentle but absolutely sure. Senna watched the horizon like a veteran scout, every muscle coiled for immediate action. "How many died at your village?" Jack asked through gritted teeth as the medicinal paste burned like liquid fire. 42, Ayana replied without emotion, though Jack caught the flash of pain in her eyes. "Including my father, Chief Koyo. 15 women and children were taken as prisoners for leverage." "Morrison's standard methodology," Jack muttered bitterly. "Kill the warriors to break resistance, capture families to control survivors. Use them as human shields and bargaining chips." "You know this Colonel Morrison personally?" Kachina asked while binding Jack's shoulder with clean strips of cloth torn from her own clothing. Jack's laugh was bitter as winter wind cutting through mountain passes. "William Morrison and I have considerable history. He's the one who ordered the massacre at Pine Ridge, the one whose orders I refused to follow." Understanding passed between the 3 women like chain lightning illuminating a stormy sky. Their enemy was Jack's enemy. The symmetry was too perfect to ignore, as if the spirits themselves had arranged this meeting in the middle of nowhere. Senna pointed toward the eastern ridge, where dust was beginning to rise in the distance. "Riders approaching fast, large group." Ayana stood in one fluid motion, checking her bow and the 40 arrows in her quiver. How many can you count? Too many to fight directly, Senna replied grimly, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Jack struggled to sit up despite Kachina's protests, ignoring the fire shooting through his shoulder. Help me to that boulder cluster. I can still shoot if you prop me up right. Kachina pushed him back down with surprising strength for such a slender woman. You've lost too much blood. You'd pass out after the first shot. Leave us exposed. Then leave me here with my rifle and ammunition. You three can disappear into the rocks like smoke. I'll buy you time to escape. Ayana's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Did you abandon my mother at Pine Ridge when staying meant risking court-martial? That was different. I was healthy, had military options, backup plans. There are no options here that don't include all of us. Ayana cut him off with absolute finality. Sacred law binds me to you until you can stand and fight as an equal. That bond doesn't break because enemy soldiers approach with superior numbers. The dust cloud grew larger and more ominous, accompanied by the thunder of many hoofbeats on hard-packed earth. Jack counted at least 20 riders moving fast and with obvious purpose. Morrison had found their trail with military efficiency. But something else moved in the rocks above, a small figure darting between the shadows with the desperate energy of absolute terror. Senna noticed it immediately, her bow coming up in one smooth motion. Wait, Ayana called sharply. That's not a soldier. A young Apache boy, perhaps 12 years old, scrambled down the canyon wall with the frantic speed of someone running for his life. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dust, tears, and something that might have been blood. He stumbled toward them on legs that shook with exhaustion. Tahatan? Kachina rushed to catch the boy as his legs gave out completely. What are you doing here? You should be with the other survivors. Between gasping breaths that seemed to tear at his throat, the boy managed to speak. Escaped from the soldier camp. Had to warn you all. He looked directly at Jack with eyes far too old for his 12 years. You're the one they call Iron Wolf. The soldiers, they're not just hunting Apache. They're hunting you specifically. Jack's blood turned to ice water in his veins. What exactly did you hear, son? Colonel Morrison told his sergeants in my hearing, bring me Jack Malone alive at all costs. Any man who kills him faces immediate court-martial and execution. He wants you for something special, something public. The pieces clicked into place in Jack's tactical mind with sickening clarity. Morrison didn't want simple revenge for past defiance. He wanted a public trial, a chance to parade the infamous Iron Wolf before military tribunals, newspaper reporters, and political officials. Jack's execution would send a crystal-clear message to every soldier who might question orders in the future. There's more, Tahatan continued once he'd caught his breath. The prisoners, they're being moved tomorrow morning to Fort Apache under heavy guard. 20 soldiers with them for the march. But Morrison left 25 men here specifically to hunt you down. Ayana helped the boy drink from her water gourd, supporting his weight as he swayed with exhaustion. You took enormous risk bringing this warning to people you barely know. Tahatan straightened with the dignity of a young warrior carrying sacred responsibilities. My father was war chief of Ayana's father's allied band. Before the soldiers killed him yesterday, he made me swear by our ancestors' spirits to protect Chief Koyo's daughter. I keep my word, no matter the cost. Jack studied the boy with newfound respect and a growing sense of kinship. 12 years old and already carrying the burden of sacred oaths that would define his entire life. The Apache way produced hard people because it had to. Survival in this harsh land demanded nothing less than absolute commitment. Smart, brave kid, Jack said seriously, but it doesn't fundamentally change our tactical situation. Morrison's got us pinned in this canyon with overwhelming force and better positioning. Maybe not as hopeless as it appears, Ayana said thoughtfully, her strategic mind already working. Tahatan, You said 25 soldiers remained here for the hunt? The boy nodded vigorously. They split into three separate groups for maximum coverage. 8 men searching the northern approach routes, 7 watching the southern exit to prevent escape, 10 holding the main camp at Devil's Canyon, where the water is. Jack's tactical mind immediately began processing the intelligence like pieces of a complex military puzzle. Classic hammer and anvil formation. Drive us toward the main force, crush us against superior numbers with coordinated pressure. He looked at Ayana with grudging professional respect. But if we know their exact positions and timing, we can pick them apart piece by piece using traditional Apache methods. Ayana finished with a predator's smile. Turn hunters into prey. Senna grinned for the first time since Jack had met her. Now you're speaking our language, Iron Wolf. As the sun climbed higher and the enemy drew inexorably closer, Jack realized something profound had shifted in his circumstances. He was no longer a dying man waiting for rescue or a miracle. He was part of something larger and more dangerous, a war band bound by honor, blood debt, and the unbreakable laws of the desert. The battle for Copper Ridge was about to begin, and Iron Wolf intended to remind Colonel Morrison why some men earned legendary names. Dawn broke blood red over Devil's Canyon as Jack Malone studied the enemy positions from their hidden observation post. His shoulders still burned like hellfire with each heartbeat, but Kachina's powerful medicines had stopped the bleeding and cleared the fog from his mind. 48 hours of constant pain had taught him the crucial difference between hurting and dying, and Iron Wolf wasn't ready for either surrender or death. 25 soldiers divided into 3 tactical groups, he murmured, sketching their positions in the dirt with a sharp stick. Morrison split them intelligently, rotating patrols every 4 hours, overlapping fields of fire, main camp controlling both water access and high ground advantage. Ayana knelt beside him, her traditional war paint freshly applied in the ancient Apache manner. Black stripes beneath her eyes to reduce glare, red ochre on her forehead to honor the war spirits. In the old days, my father would have sent 50 seasoned warriors against such numbers. We have exactly 4. 4 can be enough, Senna said quietly, checking her weapons with ritual precision. If we fight like our ancestors taught us. Jack looked at these 3 remarkable women with growing confidence. Ayana possessed the natural bearing of a war chief, tactical intelligence inherited through generations of Apache military tradition. Kachina clutched both her medicine bag and her fighting knives with equal competence. Senna moved with the coiled readiness of a hunting cat that had never missed its target. Add young Tahatan's exceptional scouting abilities, and they had something Morrison wouldn't expect or know how to counter. A perfectly balanced war party operating by rules the cavalry had never encountered. First fundamental rule of asymmetric warfare, Jack said, drawing tactical lines in the dirt with practiced efficiency. Never fight on the enemy's preferred terms. They expect us to run, hide, or surrender. Instead, we're going to hunt them systematically. Kachina studied the crude battlefield map with professional interest. How do we hunt 25 well-armed soldiers with superior weapons and establish positions? Jack's smile was cold as January moonlight over frozen ground. We make them afraid of their own shadows. Apache warriors taught me that lesson 15 years ago during the Geronimo campaigns. Terror is a force multiplier that can equalize superior numbers. He outlined their strategy with military precision, honed by decades of combat experience. Phase 1, eliminate the patrol groups using stealth tactics and superior knowledge of local terrain. Phase 2, psychological warfare designed to demoralize and fragment the main camp's discipline. Phase 3, rescue the prisoners during the transfer to Fort Apache, while Morrison's forces were divided and confused. Senna, you're our ghost, Jack continued with growing enthusiasm for the plan. These cavalry soldiers don't understand true Apache movement techniques. You can get within knife range before they realize death is standing beside them. The young woman's eyes gleamed with anticipation. I've been waiting my entire life to hear those words from Iron Wolf. Kachina, your responsibilities include medical support and specialized weapons preparation. Can you create effective poison for arrowheads using local resources? My father taught me the old ways before the soldiers came, she replied confidently. Datura root extract combined with coral snake venom. One scratch means death within minutes, no exceptions. Excellent. Ayana, you're our sniper and tactical commander. That composite bow has better range and accuracy than most cavalry carbines when properly used. Pick your targets carefully. Make every shot count for maximum psychological impact. Ayana tested her bowstring tension with expert fingers. What about you, Iron Wolf? You can barely stand without assistance. Jack struggled to his feet, fighting waves of dizziness that threatened to topple him. I'm the bait in this trap. Morrison wants me alive for his show trial, remember? That psychological advantage means he'll hesitate when he should shoot to kill. Hesitation gets soldiers buried. Tahatan raised his hand with schoolboy earnestness. What's my role in all this? Jack studied the boy with absolute seriousness. Most critical job of the entire operation. You're our communications network. Apache hand signals across long distances, coordination between separated team members during fluid combat situations. Without you maintaining contact, we're just four individuals with weapons instead of a unified fighting force. As the sun climbed higher toward its merciless zenith, they moved into their assigned positions with the fluid coordination of natural predators. Jack watched them deploy and felt something he'd almost forgotten: genuine pride in his unit's capabilities. These weren't soldiers mindlessly following orders. They were warriors fighting for their people's survival and their own honor. The first patrol group died before they understood they were under attack. Senna materialized from behind a weathered boulder, like smoke given deadly form. Her blade found the patrol sergeant's throat before he could make a sound. The second soldier turned toward the noise and took Ayana's arrow through his heart with surgical precision. The third man managed to draw his service pistol before Kachina's throwing blade sprouted from his forehead like a steel flower. 3 experienced cavalry troopers dead in 15 seconds. No gunshots to alert other patrols, no warning cries, no alarms. Just deadly silence returning to the canyon as if nothing had happened. Phase 1, first objective complete, Tahatan signaled from his concealed position using traditional Apache hand language. The second patrol lasted approximately 30 seconds longer, not because they were more competent, but because they had slightly better positioning. Senna had transformed into something beyond normal human capability, a desert spirit that could materialize from shadow and stone at will. She moved like water, finding the path of least resistance, flowing around obstacles that would stop ordinary people. The Apache ancestors had trained their greatest warriors in this deadly choreography, and Senna proved herself their perfect student. The patrol leader fell with Ayana's arrow through his spine, the shaft punching through uniform fabric and bone with lethal efficiency. His corporal died with Senna's blade between his ribs, the steel finding his heart with anatomical precision. The remaining soldiers managed to fire 2 wild shots skyward before Kachina's poison darts found their marks. 15 down, 10 to go, Jack counted grimly, watching the tactical situation develop. But now Morrison knew something was seriously wrong with his carefully planned operation. The colonel's voice echoed across the canyon, amplified and distorted by the stone walls. Iron Wolf, I know you're out there somewhere. This ends immediately when you surrender yourself. Jack stood up on the ridge, deliberately exposing himself to enemy fire while trusting his team's positioning. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of a lifetime military professional. Morrison, you want me? Come and take me. 3 rifles cracked simultaneously from different positions. Bullets sparked off the rocks exactly where Jack had been standing. But Iron Wolf had already melted back into cover with Apache-taught efficiency. Morrison's remaining men were shooting at ghosts and shadows. "You're making them extremely nervous," Ayanna observed with deep satisfaction. "That's precisely the tactical objective," Jack replied. "Nervous soldiers make fatal mistakes under pressure." The psychological warfare campaign was producing measurable results. Through Tahatan's continuous scouting reports, they learned that Morrison's remaining soldiers were jumping at every natural sound, firing at imaginary targets, arguing among themselves about phantom enemies. The colonel's iron military discipline was cracking under the sustained pressure. Phase 2 escalated dramatically when Senna began leaving her calling cards throughout the battlefield area. The Apache had an ancient tradition of marking their successful hunts, not from cruelty or barbarism, but to send clear messages to their enemies about capabilities and intentions. Senna adapted this traditional practice for modern warfare, leaving carefully arranged stones and painted symbols near each patrol route. The first symbol depicted a wolf's paw print in red ochre paint. The second showed a cavalry rifle crossed with a traditional Apache war lance. The third proved most psychologically effective, a simple human skull painted in white clay that gleamed like bleached bone under the merciless desert sun. "She's completely inside their heads now," Jack said with genuine professional admiration. "Half those soldiers are seeing Apache warriors behind every rock formation." But Morrison wasn't finished demonstrating why he'd earned his fearsome reputation as a formidable tactical commander. The colonel's next strategic move showed sophisticated understanding of psychological pressure. Instead of sending out additional patrols to be systematically eliminated, he consolidated his remaining forces and made an announcement that chilled Jack's blood. "Iron Wolf, I'm done playing tactical games with you. Every hour you delay unconditional surrender, I personally execute one Apache prisoner, starting immediately." The sound of a single gunshot echoed across Devil's Canyon with horrible finality. Then Morrison's voice again, calm and absolutely implacable. "That was an elderly woman. Next hour brings a child's turn." Ayanna's face went pale beneath her war paint. "Murdering monster." Jack felt rage building in his chest like wildfire consuming dry timber. This revealed Morrison's true nature, the man who'd ordered wholesale massacre, who saw human lives as expendable chess pieces to be sacrificed for tactical advantage. "We advance to Phase 3 immediately," Jack said with deadly quiet intensity. "Right now." But as they prepared for their final assault, a new and unexpected threat materialized from the desert heat shimmer. A lone rider approached the canyon at full gallop, dust streaming behind him like a banner announcing doom itself. Tahatan scrambled down from his observation perch, genuine terror written across his young features. "Jack, it's the Scorpion himself!" Jack's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Gideon Hayes, the most feared and successful bounty hunter in the entire Southwest Territory. For 3 relentless years, this man had pursued Jack across 1,000 miles of desert, mountain, and prairie, getting closer with each encounter. Hayes maintained a reputation for never bringing prisoners back alive. The bounty hunter reined in his horse at the canyon's mouth, casual as a man arriving for Sunday dinner at his family ranch. Even from considerable distance, Jack could see Hayes's trademark equipment, Spencer rifle across his saddle, twin Remington pistols in tooled leather holsters, and the grisly trophies that earned him his sinister nickname. 4 preserved human heads swung from his saddlebags like macabre decorations. "Jack Malone," Hayes's voice carried clearly across the rocks with practiced projection. "3 years I've been hunting you across half the continent. Time has come to collect my $2,000 bounty." Jack stepped into clear view, his Colt Peacemaker ready in his hand. "Hayes, thought you'd finally retired to that ranch in California you're always talking about. Soon as I collect your head and bounty money, Hayes dismounted with the fluid confidence of a man who'd never lost a gunfight in 30 years of professional killing. Morrison's got you pinned down tight, but he foolishly wants you breathing. I operate under no such restrictive limitations. The bounty hunter raised his Spencer rifle and fired in one impossibly smooth motion. The heavy bullet cracked past Jack's ear, close enough to part his hair and leave powder burns on his neck. Hayes was accurate as Swiss clockwork and twice as deadly in practical application. Jack dove for cover as two more precision shots shattered rocks around his position, sending sharp fragments flying like shrapnel. Hayes was methodically working his way up the canyon, using every piece of available cover like a veteran Apache fighter, which he was. The man had learned his lethal trade hunting Geronimo's warriors during the final campaigns. "Ayanna," Jack called desperately, "can you get a clean shot on him?" "Not without exposing myself completely. He's got all the high ground positions covered with that rifle." This represented extremely bad tactical positioning. Hayes commanded the only practical exit route, while Morrison held the interior positions. They were caught between hammer and anvil, with no maneuvering room and rapidly diminishing options. Then Senna performed an act that permanently redefined Jack's understanding of pure courage. The young Apache woman stood up in full view of both Hayes and Morrison's remaining soldiers, raised her arms toward the sky, and began singing in her clear voice. The ancient death song of her people echoed off the canyon walls, rising and falling in haunting melodies that predated European arrival by countless generations. Every weapon in Devil's Canyon swung toward her slender figure. 20 rifle barrels aimed at one brave woman silhouetted against the sky like a target. For one heartbeat that lasted forever in Jack's memory, nobody moved or breathed. Then Senna dropped flat as Ayanna's arrow took Hayes through the shoulder, spinning him around. Kachina's throwing knife caught Morrison's best marksman in the throat. Jack put 3 rapid rounds into the rocks where Morrison's soldiers were positioned, forcing them to seek cover. But Hayes wasn't finished yet. Wounded and bleeding, the veteran bounty hunter still managed to work his Spencer's lever and send a round toward Ayanna's position. The bullet struck stone inches from her head, showering her with razor-sharp rock fragments that drew blood. "That's enough," Jack roared with battlefield fury. Iron Wolf stepped into the open with his Colt aimed directly at Hayes' chest. The range was less than 50 yards, point-blank distance for an experienced gunfighter with steady nerves. "Drop the rifle, Hayes." The bounty hunter smiled through the blood running down his arm. "You've got one shot, Jack. Miss, and I'll put 6 rounds through you before your body hits ground." "Won't miss." "Maybe not, but Morrison's got 15 rifles aimed at your Apache friends right now. Kill me, and they all die in the crossfire." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, then gradually relaxed. Hayes was absolutely right. This wasn't just about 2 aging gunfighters settling personal scores. Innocent lives hung in the balance, and Jack couldn't sacrifice them for revenge. "Smart man," Hayes said approvingly. "Now drop your weapon carefully," and Ayanna's second arrow took the bounty hunter directly through the heart. Hayes looked down at the feathered shaft protruding from his chest with something resembling surprise. He opened his mouth to speak, then toppled backward into the dust with a sound like falling timber. 3 decades of professional killing ended with a whisper of fletching through desert air. But their moment of victory celebration proved tragically short-lived. Morrison's voice boomed across the canyon, filled with cold military fury and absolute determination. "Enough games and delays. Iron Wolf, you have exactly 10 minutes to surrender unconditionally, or I start systematically executing every Apache prisoner. Every last man, woman, and child dies unless you walk into my camp with both hands raised." Jack looked at his remarkable companions, Ayanna with her bow ready for continued battle, Kachina gripping her medicine bag like a sacred talisman, Senna still singing softly under her breath. Tahatan watching everything with eyes far too experienced for his 12 years. 10 minutes, Jack repeated grimly, checking his pocket watch. Ayana met his gaze with absolute steadiness. Apache law says I'm bound to you until you can stand as an equal warrior. That sacred bond doesn't break for threats or overwhelming odds. This isn't your fight anymore, Jack protested desperately. Morrison wants me specifically. You three can disappear into the desert, live to continue the struggle another day. Wrong, Senna said quietly, but with absolute conviction. This became our fight the moment you took a bullet defending our village. Apache don't abandon their war chiefs, ever. Kachina nodded firm agreement. Besides, where would we go that Morrison won't eventually hunt us down? Better to end this here, on ground of our choosing. Tahatan stepped forward with dignity that would have suited a warrior 3 times his age. My father died fighting for our people's freedom. If I die fighting beside Iron Wolf, the ancestor spirits will welcome me as a man. Jack felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Not physically, but emotionally. For 15 long years, he'd been running alone, carrying the guilt of Pine Ridge like a stone in his heart. Now surrounded by these remarkable people who'd chosen to stand with him against impossible odds, Jack finally understood what he'd been missing all these years. Family. Not the kind bound merely by blood, but the deeper connection forged in battle and sealed by shared sacrifice for something larger than individual survival. All right then, he said quietly, checking his weapons one final time. Let's go remind Colonel Morrison why some men earn legendary names. The final phase of their war was about to begin, and Iron Wolf intended to make it memorable. The sun hung directly overhead like a merciless eye when Jack Malone walked into Devil's Canyon with his hands raised high. His Colt Peacemaker remained holstered at his side, but every soldier in Morrison's camp understood that Iron Wolf could clear leather faster than a striking rattlesnake. 20 nervous rifles tracked his deliberate movement across the open ground. Colonel William Morrison stood beside a cluster of Apache prisoners, 15 women, children, and elderly men bound to wooden stakes like sacrificial offerings to some vengeful god. The colonel had maintained military appearance despite the desert heat, every medal and ribbon positioned with regulation precision. Even in this god-forsaken canyon, Morrison projected the image of absolute authority. Jack Malone, Morrison said with obvious satisfaction, the infamous Iron Wolf. You appear considerably older than I expected. 15 years of running from murderers will age any man, Jack replied, stopping exactly 20 paces from the prisoner's stakes. Close enough for normal conversation, far enough to maintain tactical options. Running from justice, Morrison corrected with cold precision. Running from the consequences of your betrayal and mutiny. Jack's eyes never wavered from Morrison's face. I prefer to call it running from war criminals. The colonel's jaw tightened visibly. Behind him, his surviving soldiers shifted nervously in the oppressive heat. These men knew Iron Wolf's fearsome reputation. The Confederate veteran who'd survived Gettysburg's carnage. The cavalry officer who'd fought beside Custer before their falling out. The gunfighter who'd killed 12 men in documented face-to-face encounters. You're here to surrender unconditionally, Morrison stated as fact. Drop your weapons immediately. Submit to proper military justice for your crimes. That what you call systematic murder? Jack gestured toward the helpless prisoners with barely controlled rage. Military justice. These people harbored enemies of the United States government, Apache raiders who killed innocent settlers and burned homesteads throughout the territory. Morrison's voice carried absolute conviction in his cause. I'm bringing civilization to this frontier wilderness. By murdering children and elderly people? By removing dangerous obstacles to inevitable progress. Morrison drew his sidearm. a nickel-plated Smith & Wesson .44 with ivory grips that gleamed in the sunlight. Enough philosophical discussion. Surrender immediately, or these prisoners start dying systematically. Jack studied the Apache captives with growing determination. An elderly woman with gray braids watched him with eyes like chips of obsidian. Two small children huddled together, too frightened to cry properly. A teenage girl held her chin high, despite the obvious terror he could read in her face. These people had placed their faith in Iron Wolf's legendary reputation, believed he would somehow save them against impossible odds. Jack wondered if their trust was tragically misplaced. You've got one significant problem with your plan, Morrison. Which is what exactly? Jack's smile was cold as winter moonlight over frozen graves. You assume I came here alone. The first arrow materialized from nowhere, taking Morrison's sergeant through the throat and dropping him instantly. The second arrow found the corporal manning the canyon's only practical exit. Before Morrison's soldiers could react to the sudden attack, Senna materialized from behind the prisoner's stakes like an avenging spirit, her blade opening the nearest trooper's throat in one smooth, practiced motion. "Apache war party!" someone screamed in genuine terror. Chaos erupted through the military camp like wildfire consuming dry timber. Soldiers spun in frantic circles, shooting at shadows and sometimes each other in their panic. Kachina's poison darts dropped 3 men within seconds. Ayana's arrows seemed to fly from every direction simultaneously, striking with surgical precision that spoke of years of training. But Morrison maintained his focus entirely on Jack, his ivory-handled pistol rock steady despite the bedlam erupting around them both. Clever tactical thinking, the colonel admitted with grudging professional respect. But it changes nothing fundamental. Kill me, and my men will slaughter every Apache in this camp out of pure revenge. Kill you, Jack replied conversationally, and your men lose their commanding officer. Soldiers without leadership become just frightened men with guns. Morrison's finger tightened noticeably on his trigger. Perhaps true, but you'll be dead, Jack, and that's sufficient for my purposes. The two men faced each other across 20 paces of sand and stone. The classic Western standoff that had settled disputes since the first pioneers crossed the Mississippi River. Jack's hand hovered over his Colt, muscles coiled for the fastest draw of his entire life. You always were too confident for your own good, Morrison. And you were always too sentimental, Malone. Sentiment makes men weak. They drew their weapons simultaneously in a blur of motion. Morrison proved faster than Jack had anticipated. The colonel's nickel-plated .44 cleared leather with practiced military efficiency, swinging toward Jack's chest with lethal intent. But Iron Wolf was decisively faster. Jack's Colt appeared in his hand through pure instinct, the hammer falling before Morrison's gun reached horizontal. The .45 slug caught Morrison's center mass with devastating impact, spinning him completely around. The colonel's shot went wild, chipping stone harmlessly from the distant canyon wall. Morrison staggered backward, clutching his chest where dark blood was spreading rapidly across his previously pristine uniform. "Impossible," he wheezed through bloody foam. "I was faster on the draw." "Faster," Jack agreed, walking deliberately toward the dying man. "But not smarter about tactics." He nodded toward the chaos that had completely engulfed the military camp. Morrison's remaining soldiers were surrendering as rapidly as they could throw down their weapons. Senna had cut all the prisoners' bonds while Kachina tended their various wounds. Ayana stood over a growing pile of discarded rifles, her bow still ready for immediate action. 15 seasoned cavalry troopers, defeated decisively by 4 Apache warriors and 1 broken-down ex-soldier with a conscience. Morrison fell heavily to his knees, blood frothing from his lips with each labored breath. You haven't won anything meaningful here. There will be others coming. The army never forgets or forgives." "Maybe so," Jack said quietly, holstering his smoking Colt. But they'll remember what happened in this canyon. Remember that some fights cost more than they're worth. The colonel's eyes glazed over, fixing on something beyond Jack's shoulder that only dying men could see. William Morrison died as he'd lived, utterly convinced of his own righteousness, even with his sins finally catching up to him. Jack turned away from the corpse to survey the aftermath of their unlikely victory. Apache prisoners embraced their rescuers with tears of joy and overwhelming disbelief. Surviving soldiers sat with their hands raised, waiting to learn their ultimate fate. The desert wind carried away the acrid smell of gunpowder, leaving only silence and ancient stone. "It's finally over," Ayanna said, joining him beside Morrison's still form. "This particular battle is finished," Jack agreed thoughtfully, "but there will be serious consequences. The Army doesn't easily forgive attacks on their personnel, regardless of justification." Kachina approached, carrying her medical supplies and looking satisfied with her work. "The prisoners are mostly unharmed, dehydrated, some minor injuries, but they'll all recover completely." Senna wiped her blade clean on a dead soldier's shirt with ritual precision. "What do we do with the survivors?" She gestured toward Morrison's remaining men. Jack studied the captured soldiers thoughtfully. Mostly young recruits, scared and desperately far from their homes. "Turn them loose, take their horses and weapons, but let them walk back to Fort Apache. They've learned enough harsh lessons for one day." "You certain about that decision?" Tahatin asked with surprising maturity. "They might bring reinforcements for revenge." "They might," Jack acknowledged seriously, "but killing helpless prisoners isn't what we fought for here." As the sun began its long descent toward the western horizon, the unlikely war party made their final preparations. The rescued Apache would scatter into the vast desert, disappearing into the network of hidden villages that had sustained their people for countless generations. Morrison's soldiers had been released with a clear message for their military superiors. The Apache weren't defeated, merely temporarily dispersed. Jack found himself standing apart from the others, watching the desert paint itself in brilliant shades of gold and deep crimson. 15 years of constant running had brought him full circle, back to the fundamental choice between conscience and convenience that had defined his entire life since that terrible day. Ayanna approached quietly, her war paint washed away to reveal the remarkable woman beneath a fierce warrior's mask. "What will you do now?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Jack considered the question with unusual care. "Been thinking seriously about Montana territory. Maybe buy a small spread up there, raise some cattle, try to live quietly for once in my life." "Alone?" Something subtle in her tone made Jack look at her more carefully. "That was my original plan, yes. Apache law says I'm bound to you until you can stand as an equal warrior. Today, you stood as more than equal. You stood as a war chief leading his people." Jack felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "So our debt is finally paid in full?" "The legal debt, yes." Ayanna stepped closer, close enough that he could see those remarkable flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "But there are other kinds of bonds between people, stronger ones that last longer." Before Jack could formulate an appropriate response, Tahatin came running across the sand, his young face bright with uncontainable excitement. "Jack, the soldiers left considerable supplies behind, food, ammunition, even some silver coins." The boy stopped suddenly, becoming serious. I want to ask you something important." "Go ahead, son." Could I possibly come with you? To Montana?" Tahatin's voice cracked with adolescent uncertainty. "I could help with the cattle, learn to become a real cowboy. I don't have anywhere else to go now." Jack looked at this remarkable boy who'd risked everything to warn strangers, who'd fought beside seasoned warriors without flinching once, 12 years old and already carrying himself like a fully grown man. "Ranch work's brutal labor, son. Long hours, harsh winters, Ornery livestock that'll test your patience daily. I'm not afraid of honest work. I know you're not. Jack extended his hand, and Tahatan shook it with the gravity of a formal business contract. Montana it is then, but first you'll need to learn proper shooting. Kachina and Senna approached, having clearly overheard the conversation with growing interest. The medicine woman smiled, the first genuine expression of pure joy Jack had seen from her. Montana sounds quite interesting, Kachina said thoughtfully. I've heard they desperately need doctors in those frontier towns. Senna grinned with anticipation. And I've heard Montana Territory has excellent hunting. Deer, elk, even bear. Much better than surviving on lizards and jackrabbits. Jack looked around at these four remarkable people who'd chosen to stand with him when the world offered nothing but danger and overwhelming uncertainty. The family he'd never expected to find in the middle of a war zone. Montana's a very long way from here, he said quietly. Dangerous journey through hostile territory. No guarantees any of us will make it alive. We survived today against impossible odds, Ayana pointed out with simple logic. That's enough proof for now. As the desert stars began emerging in the darkening sky like scattered diamonds, Jack Malone realized something profound had fundamentally changed inside him. For 15 long years, he'd been running from his past, carrying guilt and shame like physical weights that grew heavier each day. Now surrounded by people who'd chosen to judge him by his actions rather than his reputation, Jack finally felt something he'd forgotten could exist. Peace. Not the peace of surrender or bitter resignation, but the deeper tranquility that comes from finding your true place in the world. His place wasn't in military courtrooms or newspaper headlines or political speeches. It was here, with these people, building something better from the ashes of everything that came before. Montana, he said aloud, testing the word like a prayer offered to benevolent spirits. Montana, Ayana agreed with finality. They rode out of Devil's Canyon as the sun disappeared completely behind the western mountains. 5 figures silhouetted against the dying light like legendary heroes from ancient stories. Behind them lay death and destruction, the inevitable cost of standing against evil when good men chose action over safety. Ahead lay uncertainty, hardship, and the kind of challenges that broke weaker spirits into fragments. But they rode together, Apache warriors and Confederate veteran, medicine woman and young scout, all bound by ties stronger than blood or law or simple convenience. They rode toward tomorrow with genuine hope in their hearts and tempered steel in their spines, ready for whatever trials awaited. Iron Wolf was finally going home to a place he'd never seen, with a family forged in battle and sealed by choice. The legend was far from over.